We all love a legendary comeback, and Degree Original Cool Rush is back and better than ever. Cool Rush isn't just a scent, it's a movement, a fan favorite that delivers bold, fresh vibes and all-day sweat protection. Whether you have a man that spends hours in the gym, heads into the office early, or is just trying to stay fresh on a long day, Cool Rush has their back. Head to your local Walmart or Target and grab Degree Cool Rush, the fan favorite scent from the world's #1 antiperspirant brand.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell you scary stories to keep you up at night. You can follow the Red Treehouse wherever you stream podcasts. Just be sure to follow, like, and subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. As the Red Treehouse settles into its 3rd year, and as we inch towards 300 total episodes, I'm working on a few new elements to bring to the show, including longer episodes, video narration on YouTube, and live narration. Listen, I know when we hear the words new or change, alarm bells go off in our head. But let me assure you, the Red Treehouse isn't changing. I'll still be sharing the scariest stories to keep you up at night. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, I'm going to narrate 10 true scary Reddit stories, all of which are truly unsettling and creepy. Is it possible that your scary and unexplained experiences are paranormal or supernatural? I'll share the stories. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. Story 1. When I was a child, I wanted to believe ghosts were real. I wanted to desperately prove that. For many years I tried, but to no avail. That is, until I turned 18. By then, I did believe some things couldn't be explained, and was slowly losing hope. I worked in an aviary that had lovebirds, cockatiels, and budgies, equaling out to 500 total roughly. Anyone who has dealt with breeding small parrots understands that some parents aren't very good to their chicks and will abandon them or abuse them. Of course, the parents were to be kept more as pets and were not allowed to breed, so I would become the new mom. Take into consideration that feeding chicks is a lot like feeding a human baby. They will want to be fed even in the night, from 2 to 4 hour intervals. One night, I was laying in my bed and had said my pleasantries to my friends for the night. In my silence, I was recollecting some memories, when suddenly, my silence was broken. I heard an odd, gurgling sound. I figured it was the water bottle I kept for my little fledglings and thought nothing much. Dead silence flowed through the room, and I began to become a little alert from the oddness of it all. Again, the queer quietness was stolen. The sound was akin to gurgling or croaking. I have no idea how to really describe it. It just made my body go into flight or fight mode, and my hair stood on end. Honestly, it sounds like a cliche reaction, but it is true. I looked around and saw nothing. I decided to take the next step and slam my foot against the bed. To my horror, I felt a force shove against my bed 4 seconds later. I was astounded and in shock. Nothing happened after that. 2 weeks later, I was walking into the kitchen and went to the fridge. Before I opened the door, that same noise was heard not 2 fucking inches from my face. I don't remember grabbing anything from the fridge, but I do remember calmly walking back to my bedroom, where I noped for the rest of the night. A month later, in the middle of the day, I was talking to my friend on Skype. The door to my bedroom started shaking violently, and I screamed at my brother to fucking knock it off. He yelled from the bedroom that it wasn't him, and I quickly opened up the door. Nothing. How my brother could run silently to the living room in just a second is beyond me. I can't explain it. I'm pretty sure my friend pooped his pants on the other end. I was happy that something happened in front of someone, and that I couldn't explain it. Story 2. It was about 4 years ago. It wasn't the first paranormal occurrence to happen, just the one that scared me the most. One night, my 2.5-year-old son woke my husband and I up when he crawled into our bed. I couldn't fall back asleep, so I decided to work on a project in my craft room. I was in there for about 45 minutes when the small monitor to the nanny cam started rapidly flickering on and off. Mind you, these were not motion-censored cams, only continuous feed. The cams are in the living room and our son's bedroom. I went over to the monitor and picked it up. All of a sudden, it made this loud, ear-piercing sound like mic feedback. It startled me, and I dropped the monitor face down. I noticed the glow around the edges had stopped flickering. I picked up the monitor and turned to look at the screen. There, I saw my son standing as still as a statue in the middle of the living room, staring at the wall. I started for the door with the monitor still in my hand. When I glanced down again, my son's head turned, only his head, and his eyes went directly to the camera in the upper corner of the room. He had no expression on his face at all. I immediately left the room and went through the small kitchen and dining room, rounded the corner to the living room, and found it empty. The door to our bedroom was on the other side. I went in there, and my son was sound asleep in the same position he was in when I left. My husband looked up from his e-reader. I asked him if our son had woken up and went to the living room. He told me no. I asked if my husband had gotten up to go to the bathroom or kitchen. I was thinking maybe he just didn't see our son try to follow him. But he swore that he didn't leave the bed at all, and our son had been peacefully snoring away the entire time. Like I said before, this wasn't the first time we had seen doppelgangers, but it was always so brief that you really didn't have time to get scared or have it completely register in your brain. This one was different though. It wasn't just a glimpse. Above all, it was the look on my son's face, that empty, void stare, when he turned his head to face the camera. Typing it now still gives me the chills. Story 3. So one of my closest friends growing up lived in a house that was, beyond a reasonable doubt, haunted as fuck. The house was definitely somewhere around a century old, or at least now it is, and our town was situated in a very woodsy suburb. He and every member of his family had experiences there. Several of our friends had their own experiences there as well, and I had my own too. Honestly, it would be impossible to try and condense it down into one experience, and I believe it's worth sharing the accounts I can remember. I'll start with the least scary one, which was thankfully my own, and then move to the ones worth telling. During high school, my parents went on a vacation, and for a few days I stayed at a friend's house. Let's call him Paul. I stayed in Paul's room in a sleeping bag on the floor while he slept in his bed. One morning, I woke up to someone whispering in my ear, like directly into my ear. Quote, "My name. You need to leave. Now." End quote. Whatever it was didn't say it super maliciously. It was almost more of a warning. It definitely woke me up though, and immediately I thought Paul was fucking with me as he frequently did. But when I turned to my right, where he was sleeping, I realized he was completely out. I said, "What?" to him, thinking he was joking around, Except he didn't wake up. He was sound asleep. It was quiet and still too early for even Paul's parents to be awake. Then it hit me, as it still hits me today. I heard the whisper in my left ear, and Paul was on my right side. Paul had other experiences in that same room, a few I can remember off the top of my head. For a time, he told me he suffered from sleep paralysis on a consistent basis. He would see demons in his room and would be unable to move. He told me that, very frequently in his sleep, the standing fan by his bed would become a demon girl, and he would wake up with a jolt of adrenaline, having punched or thrown the fan to the ground. He told me he would sometimes see someone standing in the closet his bed faced, both asleep and awake. Oddly enough, his sleep paralysis significantly decreased as soon as he moved out of that home. That floor, the second floor where Paul, his parents, and 2 of his 4 sisters slept, was spooky. I remember getting weird feelings up there. One of his sisters claimed to see the ghost of a little boy in their bathroom. His mom once opened the closet in her bedroom to find the same little boy standing in there, looking up at her and asking for his mom. I heard about that one when I was in middle school, and it always creeped me out. It's always scarier when the adults see them too. Before my own experience, I generally thought Paul was just trying to fuck with me when he would tell me about these other experiences. Most of our other friends were the same way, thinking Paul was full of shit. Even after my own experience, at times I thought I just as easily could have dreamt it up. But then a few of those same friends, some of them complete non-believers beforehand, had their own experiences, and that changed my whole idea of the house. Once a year, Paul and his family would take a trip and have someone take care of their 2 dogs. One of our mutual friends came over to do just that one day. When she got there that evening to feed the dogs, the house was dark and empty. For some context, the dogs were being fed near the kitchen, and adjacent to the kitchen was the dining room, which led further away into the entryway, and after that, a small living room. Well, not long after feeding the dogs, she heard a blood-curdling scream, a goddamn shriek, coming from that living room, like someone was inside the house with her. She booked it outside with the dogs, checked for intruders, and saw no one was there. I'm pretty sure after that she called Paul, told him what happened, and he laughed and said, "Yeah, shit like that happens sometimes." A couple years later, one of the bigger doubters in our group, who thought all of us were full of shit, had his own experience. Paul hosted a fair amount of parties back then, and usually we would use his basement to avoid any sort of noise complaints. So one night, all of us are in the basement having a good time, and this particular friend of ours decides to run up and grab another drink from upstairs. Mind you, this friend is not the kind of guy to get completely fucked up, like he'll only ever have a beer or 2 at most. So for all intents and purposes, he's sober. He goes up and the ground floor was completely empty as everyone was in the basement. There's a porch directly outside the dining room / entryway / living room, and it extended long ways across the back of the house. As our friend was walking into the dining room to grab a beer off the table, he sees a tall, grim-looking woman standing on the porch outside, looking through the window directly at him. He knows something is wrong, because she's sort of featureless and also standing outside, by herself, looking inside. He takes his eyes off her for one moment, looks back, and finds that she's gone. A few days later, he tells Paul what happened, and Paul tells him how he and his siblings have seen that same woman before. Our friend, who was a doubter before, instantly became a believer. The basement of Paul's house was creepy as hell, but I can only think of one thing that ever happened down there. It was more of a storage cellar than anything. We still used it for parties and just generally to hang out, but it was so cluttered with random shit that whole areas of the room were completely cut off. At some point in college, one summer when I was back home, Paul and his family were doing the annual Throw Old Shit Away Fest, and he openly invited some friends to come help. I came one day, and when I got there, Paul's dad nonchalantly told me, quote, "You get to see the secret room," end quote. Turns out that in the far corner of the basement, behind a bunch of clutter, was a little storage closet nobody, besides maybe Paul's parents, knew about. We investigated it that day, and in it we found a bunch of random old shit. I can't remember everything exactly. I don't even know if Paul's family knew what this stuff was. But among all of it, I specifically remember finding this very old-fashioned, vintage music box. You know, like the one in The Conjuring with the dancing ballerina. That kind of thing. We decided it was creepy and didn't want anything to do with it, and left it in that closet. Well, on a different day, when I was thankfully not there, Paul and another friend were cleaning out the basement when suddenly that same music box started playing by itself, from behind the door of the closet. They were alone and had not been in that closet all day. They bolted up the stairs immediately. At the top of the house, there were 2 small bedrooms, both belonging to Paul's older sisters. This is the last one I will share, as it's the story that stuck with me the longest. The second oldest sister once had a vivid and intense dream in which she herself was being exorcised. A demon was being forced out of her as a group of priests were standing over her convulsing body, shouting verses at her, and she recalled it just being crazy intense. After enduring this for some time, she suddenly jolted herself awake and yelled, and at that precise moment, a rosary she kept hanging on her wall flew from its place, crashed to the floor, and shattered into a bunch of pieces, completely on its own. She was covered in sweat and completely terrified. There was no one else in the room. That place was fucking haunted.
Once upon a mundane morning, Barb's day got busy without warning. A realtor in need of an open house sign. No, 50 of them, and designed before 9.
My head hurts.
Any mighty tools to help with this plight?
Aha!
Barb made her move. She opened Canva and got in the groove.
Bulk creating Canva sheets. Create 50 signs fit for suburban streets.
Done in a click, all complete.
Sweet!
Now, imagine what your dreams can become when you put imagination to work at canva.com.
Story 4. I once lived in an old 2-bedroom, 3-story walk-up for a time in my early 20s in Toronto. A few days after moving in, my roommate Mike chides me in the morning for banging on the wall that separated our bedrooms and pacing back and forth across the apartment at night. We just agreed he must have been dreaming, or it was sounds from another apartment, as I had done no such thing. We agreed that it must have been nothing and left it at that. Except this became a regular nightly occurrence. Shortly thereafter, I started noticing at certain times in my own bedroom the cloying smell of cheap women's perfume mixed with a damp, musty smell. Imagine an old person's clothes left on a damp, musty basement floor near a litter box that wasn't being changed often enough, and you get the idea. What made it even weirder is that I would be filled with a sudden, horrible sense of foreboding a few moments before the smell would begin. Mike flaked out and left only 4 months into our 1-year lease, which meant I was left footing the rent for the entire place until I could find another roommate. I decided to try and sleep in his bedroom shortly after he moved out to see if things would get better. The very first night I slept in his former room, I had an incredibly detailed and realistic nightmare of myself standing in the dimly lit bathroom of the apartment and cutting my own face with a large shard of glass while staring into the broken bathroom mirror. It was only broken in the dream. Soon after that, I started to hear the loud bangs at night and the flushing of the toilet in the bathroom. Several times the hot water in the bathroom turned on full blast in the middle of the night. One of the freakiest things that happened not too long before I moved is the time I was woken up by the TV blaring Poltergeist on City TV at about 2 in the morning. At the time, that channel would always play movies late at night, but the fact that the one time my analog TV, you had to turn a knob to change the channel or the volume, and pull a knob to turn it on, turned on by itself at full blast, was the time a movie like Poltergeist was playing. Story 5. One night, after closing his clinic, he was asleep at home. There was a knock on the door of his home. Dr. I's grandmother opened the door. In India, there are 2 layered doors, an internal one and an external one. Here, the internal one was opened with the see-through external one locked for any additional protection. So in front of his grandmother was a person, in the dark of the night, asking in the local tongue, Tamil, for the doctor to help his wife who was pregnant and was in urgent need of medical care. The grandmother didn't want to disturb Dr. I, so basically said that he is resting and to please come back in the morning. However, he was very insistent and persisted on the assistance of the doctor, citing that it was very urgent and she was very critical. In hearing all the commotion at the front door, Dr. I woke up and on hearing the situation from the stranger, agreed to help him. He packed any medical equipment he thought would be appropriate and left with the stranger to assist him. On the way to his home, where his wife required assistance, all the routes were pitch black and without much lighting, so Dr. I still hadn't seen the stranger clearly. He could only make out that he was wearing some clothes. The stranger kept on telling him how sorry he was to disturb him so late on at night, and that his wife was truly in need of medical attention. Along the way, the stranger turned towards a graveyard, which made the doctor halt and ask. The stranger responded that his home was behind the graveyard, and thus intersecting it would be the shortest route. Dr. I agreed to follow him, albeit still not completely convinced of the man, despite the fact that he hadn't found a reason to doubt him. Traveling through the graveyard, they walked close to a lamppost, and thus some better lighting. At this point, the doctor couldn't believe it, but despite trying to locate the stranger's face, he couldn't see anything. All he could see was clothes hanging in the air. At this point, he obviously tried to hide his shock, and he tried to think of an excuse to get out of there immediately. So he told the figure that he had forgotten some of the key equipment he needed, and that he needed to run back home to get it. However, the stranger insisted that it wasn't required, and to just let it be. The doctor tried to get out of it, and said that the equipment was very important, and that he would even leave his current case behind if he didn't believe him. Leaving his bag behind, he ran to his home, hoping that the stranger thought he was hurrying to get the equipment rather than trying to escape. Once home, he told his grandmother what happened, and they both stayed vigilant throughout the night, and he managed eventually to get some shut-eye. In the morning, still shocked by the events of the previous night, the doctor went into work as usual and tried to go about his everyday business so as to forget about what happened the night before. During the day, the local mayor/chancellor, basically someone in a high post at the town's local government, had come to his clinic to get a checkup for his son. While small talk took precedent, the doctor mentioned how the local government could do more to install more streetlights so as to improve visibility at night. He cited the previous night's incident as an example. Without getting into too many details, and basically suggested that he couldn't see anything while following a potential patient. The mayor seemed intrigued by the example, so he asked the doctor to explain further, to which the doctor explained further, but kept out the detail about him seeing basically an invisible figure. It's important to understand that things like this can be perceived as a sign of madness in Indian culture. The mayor seemed interested, but was unsurprised, and he requested that the doctor drop by his office when he closed the clinic. Still scarred by the event of last night, and now worried about what revelations lay with the mayor, the doctor closed the clinic earlier than usual and went to his office. While there, the mayor asked for a clearer and a more frank assessment of the events told in the afternoon. Once the doctor revealed the complete truth, the mayor removed 3 files of doctors from his desk. Thinking that these were prospective doctors that may be invited to the small town, Dr. I was impressed and happy that more doctors were being invited because the town needed more medical expertise. However, the mayor said that these 3 doctors had been missing previously in similar circumstances as to the one he had experienced the night before with the invisible man. The doctors had been lured to a medical emergency late at night and then had never been seen again. This obviously shocked the doctor even more, and he started becoming much more vigilant. Story 6. I'm reading these stories while my cat looks at me from down my darkened hallway, her eyes reflecting the light. I've had a bunch of scary stories, but one that stands out was probably the time my then youngest son had gotten me up crying about a bad dream he was having at 3 a.m. He was 4 at the time. After I calmed him down, he told me he was hungry, so we went to the kitchen for a snack. He's sitting there eating cereal, when suddenly, he just kind of looks up and then casually tells me the boy who woke him up is sitting in the corner crying. Then he nods to an empty corner of the room by the table where we're seated. To humor him, I asked him why the kid was crying, and then he tells me his mommy crashed the car up the road, and now he's trying to figure out what's going on. He woke me up. Please tell him to go. So me thinking it's my kid still shook from the bad dream, looked at the corner and said, "Hey kid, go back to your mom." We kept sitting there, and my son finished his cereal and handed me the bowl. Just kind of joking around, I asked him if it worked and if the kid left. And he looked at me really seriously and said, "Yes. He told me the ambulance is coming, so it's okay. They're all dead anyway." And not even a minute later, a string of cop cars and an ambulance go past our house, sirens blaring. And I got this feeling of the most intense dread while the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I shook it off and told myself it was just a kid's imagination and coincidence, and we went back to bed. A few days later, my neighbor told me about the big wreck a mile up the street from us, where some lady was going too fast and flipped the car coming around a curve, and that no one survived. It happened at 3 o'clock in the morning on the night my own kid had woken me up. I didn't dare ask her if a little boy was in the car. Story 7. I thought my house was haunted, but then my friend reminded me that paranormal things were happening to me even before I moved here. 1. When I was a kid, I watched a toy move by itself, like someone was just dragging it along. I was watching it fascinated because I was a huge fan of Toy Story and thought it was alive. 2. I saw my sister's doppelganger. I was looking for her and thought I saw her sitting strangely stiff and looking at the wall without blinking. I tried to touch her, and she didn't move, so I panicked and ran into my mom's room, where I found my real sister playing on the PC. 3. I was eating ice cream one day at my dad's house, the same house where my grandparents and their maid had passed away. One day, a door opened by itself, and I said jokingly, "Grandpa, please close the door." And the fucking door closed. After I moved here, things got worse. My mental health has gotten way worse as well. I started remembering my past mistakes that I got over a long time ago, and having panic attacks multiple times throughout the day. It was so bad I was afraid of coming back home. Now I feel better, but I'm still stressed out and can't get over those things. The first time I encountered something paranormal in this house was when I pulled an all-nighter to spend the night playing on the PS3. I saw a white figure coming to a room next to the one I was staying in through the kitchen. The rooms on the bottom floor are connected. I thought it was looking weird, but brushed it off, thinking it was my mom or sister. The thing is, it never came out. I went to that room sometime later, and it was completely empty. There was no one there. My sister is terrified of the dark, so she would never walk around without turning the light on, and my mom would yell at me as soon as she saw me being awake at that hour. Then things started falling down for no reason, always when I wasn't looking, but still close enough to hear it. One day, the butter just rotated for no reason while I was talking with my friend. A piece of styrofoam hit the shower curtain when I was taking a bath, and my tablet was thrown off of the washing machine. Then, one day when I was outside smoking, I heard someone walking slowly in the house, rotating the door key, and scratching the door really hard for a few minutes. It couldn't be my mom, since she would yell at me. Again, it was the middle of the night. And my cat isn't a door scratcher. He's a yeller. But even if he wasn't, there was no way he could scratch the door so badly and not even leave a single mark. On different nights, while I was smoking outside during the night in the darkness so my mom wouldn't find me, I would constantly hear things in my garden, like humans jumping, running around, and the sound of something brushing up against the wall. I also felt like a person and a cat were sitting right next to me, but no one was there. It happened a few times, but every time I turned the light on, it would stop. I think it's worth mentioning that one of my cats died in the house, and so did the wife of the previous owner. I feel like the incidents inside are caused by an old woman, but on the outside are caused by a young man. Finally, one night I was outside smoking again, and my sister and mom were getting ready to leave when the front doors opened themselves without any help. I asked them if they did this, but my sister said no. And it was clear, because the look on her face showed that she was terrified. There was no wind, but even if there was, the door was far too heavy for the wind to blow it open. And besides, the door was always locked.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Business. We could all use more time. Amazon Business offers smart business buying solutions, so you can spend more time growing your business and less time doing the admin. I can see why they call it smart. Learn more at amazonbusiness.com.
Story 8. I've posted this a long time ago, but it still remains by far the single creepiest thing that ever happened to me. So here goes. I was in Taiwan one year when I was younger, and had traveled to a busy night market. These are popular gatherings of food/shop stalls that usually operate in the evening. Nearby, I spotted a sign for a net cafe in a 5 to 6 story tall building. Thinking I'd fire off some quick emails, I walked in the dark small entrance of the building. It was older and hadn't been well maintained, but that's not out of the ordinary in Taiwan. The entrance just had a dark hallway that led to a small elevator. I pressed the elevator call button and entered. The elevator was uncharacteristically new compared to the building, but I didn't think much of it. Like some Chinese/Taiwanese buildings, there wasn't a 4th floor. It's considered bad luck since 4 sounds like death. So it just read 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, which was usual. I looked for the floor the net cafe was at, the 6th floor, and pressed the button. It lurched into action quietly and began to ascend. When it stopped, I figured it was my floor, so I instinctively began to step out. Right before stepping out, however, the sight outside the elevator stopped me. It was pitch dark, only lit by the light in the elevator, and it looked like it hadn't been occupied for decades, with some random pieces of furniture covered with white cloth or similar. It was a small building, so each floor was single occupancy, so I could see pretty much the entire floor from the elevator. Thinking I must have gotten the wrong floor, I checked the light that indicates which floor you're on. Strangely, there was nothing. None of the indicators were on. But the floor button to the net cafe was still lit, so I know I haven't gotten there yet. All this happened within a couple of seconds. That's when I noticed a figure moving in the distance of the floor. It was not very visible, but I could make out what looked like a person dressed in some kind of gown, moving slowly towards the elevator, where I was standing. I was thoroughly creeped out, so I started pressing the closed door button. As soon as I pressed it, the elevator light flickered off, and now I was in pitch dark. I was this close to pissing my pants. Even now, it actually freaks me out to think back to it. The lights flickered back on in under a second, and the door closed, the elevator jolting back to life. A few moments later, it opened again to the net cafe. I was beyond relieved at this point. I walked out immediately and sat down at a computer. After gathering my wits a bit, I walked over to the cashier's desk and told them what I saw. The girl working there listened carefully, and her face turned a bit ashen, so I asked her if she heard of similar. She told me that she's never experienced it, but that some co-workers and occasional customers have brought it up. Basically, the building has 6 floors, and the 4th floor had a history. Apparently, the 4th floor used to be a hair salon until one of the employees slit her wrist over the wash station and died. The store continued operations despite stories of weird appearances. When customers got their hair rinsed, the water would look a little red, like the customer was bleeding, little things like that. And then she said something that sent fear down my spine. A few people reported seeing someone's figure walking away in the mirror, but wouldn't see anyone when they turned to check. Naturally, the business closed down a few months later. The building owner tried to re-rent the place, but never had any luck. Most businesses are quite superstitious, and no one wanted to rent the 4th floor after someone had died in it, even at a very cheap price. Finally, after dropping the price to nearly nothing, a stationery supply store wanted to rent. During the renovation of the floor, however, several accidents took place. Tools would end up in strange places. A mirror from the previous business shattered when no one was near it. And finally, a worker had his hand jammed between the elevator doors when it closed on him unexpectedly. The workers refused to continue working, and finally the business left and the business owner finally gave up and shut down the floor. He then had the elevator company come in to replace the panel so that the elevator could not go to the 4th floor. Let me repeat that. The elevator was programmed to never go to the 4th floor. It doesn't even have a button. But for some reason, sometimes when people take the elevator, it would go to the 4th floor and the doors would open, and some, like myself, would see a figure walking around in the dark. Story 9. My brother once lived in a flat in downtown Mount Clemens, Michigan. The Clem was known to be a hotspot for baths back in the Depression era and was booming with activity. Nowadays, it has some rundown parts, and this is where my brother rented his flat. It was a giant, old, raggedy house which was now separated into multiple odd apartments. Anyways, long story short, he always admitted to odd experiences, cupboards opening up, things missing. But one peculiar oddity was that he was always missing boxers/underwear from his drawer. He admitted that he thought his house was haunted, and that the ghost had a crush on him. Never anything violent or disturbing, just odd, strange things. Later on, he starts dating his future ex-wife. She starts coming around, and he notices that the oddities begin to increase. New oddities began to occur. His girlfriend would always find her shoes, which were left on a mat inside the apartment, outside the door on the patio in the morning. She'd always comment to my brother to stop putting her shoes outside, but he had no idea of why, but didn't want to frighten her. Besides, it wasn't hurting anyone, right? Well, things started getting worse. One day, he came home from work, and his girlfriend was staying there while he was gone. She claimed that the stove burner kept lighting itself, and that she'd walk into the kitchen and it would be lit. She'd turn it off, and short time later, it'd be lit again. Then one night, my brother woke up in the middle of the night and saw his girlfriend sitting at the end of the bed. Not just sees her, but feels her near his feet, staring at him. He calls out to her to come back to bed, except she doesn't respond, so he calls out louder, telling her to come back to bed and asking her what's wrong. His girlfriend then asks what he's doing, and he turns and sees she's sleeping next to him. He turns back to look at the end of the bed, but no one is there. Obviously, he's freaked out, but doesn't want to scare his girlfriend and keep her from coming over his place. A few nights later, they're both asleep, and he wakes up to his girlfriend screaming. He looks over and she's sleeping, but thrashing around on the bed holding onto her neck. He doesn't see anything, so he starts yelling and shaking her to wake her up. And after a few shakes, she wakes up crying and terrified. She starts telling my brother about how real her dream felt, and that a woman was strangling her, telling her to get out, that she doesn't belong there, and to leave her man alone. The terrifying thing is that her neck had red marks on it, possibly from trying to defend herself, though they believed it was from something else. My brother then comes clean with her. They decide to do some research and find out that the address that they live in was an old brothel back in the day that the rich bathers used to stay in. My brother lived in that house for a few more weeks before he could locate a new place, though she never came back to stay the night at all, and he never experienced anything aggressive while there. It's still kinda fucked up though. I know my brother and I can tell when he's lying, but this shit was legit, and when she talked about it, you could see how shaken up she was. Quick edit. I've added a second story. Alright, so I used to date this girl whose family told me about this. I'll try and make it quick. Long story short, she tells me that when she was a little girl, she woke up at night to see this old man who was literally on fire and staring at her in her room. She freaked out and hid under the covers yelling for her parents. But when they rushed in, they saw absolutely nothing. She refused to sleep in her room, so her parents changed it, and that was the last of it. Her parents were convinced it was a nightmare, and eventually, she believed that's all it was. Fast forward to when she's moved out and into college. Her parents call her and tell her that her little brother, now sleeping in that room, had the exact same thing happen to him. They said that they never spoke of the nightmare after it happened to her because they believed that's all it was, and they knew how terrified she was, so they would hope that she'd forgotten about it. Therefore, there was no way that her brother could have just repeated what he heard. When I was dating her, her brother was a teenager, and they both talked about what they saw and claimed that they saw the exact same thing, detail for detail. The parents were pretty freaked out about it. Still, to this day, no one knows what the hell it was or why it was there. Creepy, man.
Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant.
Whoa, that's refreshing.
And a 9.5 plus pH for every way you move.
I did take a Spain class today.
Restoring like a pro. Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original. which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
Story 10. I had lots of weird stuff happen when I was growing up. The following 3 things are brief examples. 1. I was playing street hockey in my driveway with some friends. We were using a blue hockey ball, which is important only because it was the only blue hockey ball that we had. I took a shot at the goal, which was right in front of the garage door, from about 10 feet away, and the ball disappeared mid-flight. It didn't fly off to one side or get lost in the bushes or anything. It freaking disappeared in mid-air in front of at least 4 witnesses. We made a cursory search of the area, but since it obviously didn't hit the garage door, or the goal, or anything, we just laughed it off and used a different ball. Months later, I was home watching TV when I heard a scratching sound come from behind some bookshelves that were across the room from me. We didn't have any cats or anything that would have fit back behind the bookshelf, but it wasn't a loud noise, and I chalked it up to the bookshelf creaking under the weight of all the books. Anyway, about a minute after the scratching started, the blue hockey ball rolled out from behind the bookshelf, kind of like if a cat was playing with it. It was the only blue hockey ball we ever had, so it wasn't like some other random ball magically ended up there or something. 2. I was home alone watching TV when I really felt that someone was in the house with me. Very much a you ever get that feeling that you're being watched kind of sensation. I knew I was alone, but couldn't get rid of the feeling. I really felt like someone was behind me to my left side. There was a wall directly behind me, but a hallway behind me to my left. But I really didn't want to look. It was a very odd sensation. I finally decide to look, and sure enough, there was the face of an older man, in his 60s, leaning out past the wall, staring at me. It was a very black stare, and his mouth was kind of slack, but his jaw was kind of clenched at the same time. I leaped up and shouted, and in the time it took me to spin around to face the guy, he disappeared. I went outside and waited for some other family members to get home before I went back in. The scary part about that event was that within a few months of it happening, I was awoken by the sounds of my younger brother acting very upset and my parents trying to calm him down. He had gone out and come home late. We were both teenagers at the time, after some sort of partying. And when he opened the front door, he saw a man who he described much like the man I saw sitting in the chair in the dark of the living room, waiting for him. He looked at my brother and said, "I'll be watching you," and disappeared. My brother freaked out and woke my parents up. My paternal grandfather had died when I was about 5 years old, and my brother was about 3. And neither of us remembers him well, but the man we both saw looked a lot like him. The chair my brother saw him sitting in is an antique that originally came from his house as well. 3. I was up late one night in the summer watching TV. Reading over this, it looks like I watched a lot of TV growing up. I've always been a night person, so I would typically stay up late and watch the cheesy crap that was on cable. We had a dog who loved lying on the floor wedged up against the couch, kind of like a footrest. She was not much of a guard dog or anything, but would always wake up and bark if someone was at the door. One night, I had the back door open. It led out to a screened-in porch for some air and was basically just sitting there watching TV when I heard a noise. At first, I thought it was a tractor-trailer driving by, as we lived about a block in from a relatively main road, and you would hear the occasional truck rumbling by. But the noise just seemed to get louder and louder. We lived in southern New Jersey, and occasionally we would hear helicopter overflights from trainings at McGuire Air Force Base, which was a ways away, and I thought that this was what might be happening. But the weird thing was that the dog would not wake up. I nudged her with my foot, and she just lied there, obviously breathing, but sound asleep. By this point, the noise was incredible, and I couldn't hear the TV anymore. We had a little picture on a wobbly bookshelf nearby, and it suddenly fell to the floor. The noise was as loud as a helicopter right over my house, but it was not the same kind of noise. It was more like a throbbing hum. There was no wind or anything blowing around outside either, and despite the noise, the dog wouldn't wake up, and my family wasn't waking up either. At this point, I was pretty much freaking out and decided to make a run for my room, which was upstairs and down the end of the hall. I slammed the back door shut, but left the lights and TV on and ran upstairs, through the hall, with everyone asleep right behind the doors, through my brother's room because I had to get through his to get to mine, and into my bedroom. My brother was as sound asleep as the dog was, and even now with the door closed and in a different part of the house, it still sounded like something as loud as a helicopter right over the house. I turned on all of the lights in my room, pulled the covers over my head, and that's it. I remember waking up the next day but having no memory of actually falling asleep, and I know I was wired as all hell from my sprint up the stairs and the general excitement and adrenaline. My mother mentioned that I had left the lights and TV on, so I know that that part at least happened. My best guess is that I was half asleep watching the TV and semi-dreamed, maybe even sleepwalked my way upstairs or something. But it's a very clear, vivid memory to this day, and we're talking about something that happened over 20 years ago. What did you think of these scary Reddit experiences? Comment or email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. And if you have a scary experience of your own, reach out and I'll feature your story on an upcoming episode. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, make plans to join me next time. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.
you